Hello and welcome to Real Estate Live UK and our second week of virtual events. This series of webinars this week is brought to you by White Label and our sponsors and partners, and we're delighted to have so many people tuning in for our sessions this week. We're looking to encourage audience participation during each of our panels, so to kick that off, we're about to launch a polling question asking what is the most important factor in unlocking development and ensuring the continued strength of UK real estate. We asked a similar question of our audiences in June, and we'll be sharing the results and the comparisons at the end of the week. So we'll just give everyone a short while to complete their answers. I know they're quite long, so give you a second to read through those. During the session today, please continue to interact as much as possible. We'd like lots of audience participation, as I said, so you can do that using Zoom's Q&A feature to put questions to the panel via our chair. We've got some really fantastic speakers joining us for this session, looking at how partnership working can help get the City of London moving again. And I'd now like to introduce Giles Barrie, Senior Managing Director of FTI Consulting, to begin the discussion. Giles.
Well, Bonnie, thank you for having us all. And I am sitting here in the City of London in a rather deserted office. The city is as quiet as ever this morning, and I don't think any of us agree this is sustainable. While we've got to be mindful of the health issues, we also need to be mindful of the need to get the City of London moving again. No. And today's discussion will be about how we collectively work to get the City of London moving, what the audience thinks we can do to get the City of London moving, because as I said, it's deathly quiet out there at the moment and it's just not sustainable. We're going to hear from 5 different speakers, each going to talk for 3 or 4 minutes each, and then we're going to have a discussion amongst us. But above all, we want to have your questions from the audience. One of the great things, if there are any great things about the lockdown, is that it's bred familiarity with digital platforms like this. They can work very, very interactively. So as Bonnie said, please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function, the Q&A function on your keyboard, and filter your questions through. If enough come through, we may ask them during the session, but as it is, we're going to start with the different presentations from our panelists. First up is Tom Slay from the City of London Corporation, who's going to talk about its work with bids and partnerships and how to help us recover and thrive moving out of lockdown. So, Tom, over to you first, and then I will introduce the next panelist as well.
Thank you, Giles. Thank you, Giles. Unfortunately, Tom couldn't make it today, but I am replacing him. I'm Shravan Joshi. I'm also a member of the Court of Common Council, like Tom, and I also sit on the Property Investment Board of the City. So it's a subject that I'm more than qualified to take on Tom's behalf. So thank you, Giles. It's a great pleasure to be kicking off this session. We are discussing matters of great importance at a time when we are still battling this terrible virus. And while public health is paramount, it's absolutely right that we bring business leaders, politicians, and others together to plan for this recovery now. The fragile recovery that we are getting underway has arguably been set back by the newest restrictions that have been announced by the government in the last week or so. But in spite of this, it is essential that the city develops innovative solutions and new strategies for keeping the economy going across the square mile. The city is the engine room of the nation's economy, and it will be essential to support the nationwide recovery that will be so important. With just 13% of the population, London is responsible for 23% of the UK's economy, and the square mile is, of course, at the beating heart of that. Our ability to evolve and innovate over the years is partly why the city is so important to the UK's economy. And one new innovation recently has been our embracing of the bid model as a key route to deliver regeneration and shared visions between the public and the private sectors. This was initiated first with the establishment of the Cheapside Business Alliance, and we now have a second bid in Aldgate and 2 new partnerships, one at Fleet Street and another focused on the Tower Cluster, the Eastern City Partnership. These are now on track to move to bid status within the next year or so. Collectively, these bids and partnerships cover a significant part of the City of London and represent the majority of businesses in the square mile. Traditional financial and professional services obviously make up a core element of the city, but we are also now home to media, creative and tech firms with more room for growth on the horizon. And we know from talking to our business community that they want their voice to be heard in a coordinated way. Businesses do care passionately about the environment in which they operate. It matters for their staff, for their clients, and for their customers, and is now an essential part of them delivering against their commercial and social goals. Bids allow for greater collaboration and synergy, and crucially deliver tangible results, with the age-old mantra of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts ringing loud and true. Of course, the city has always understood the power of collective action and the vital role that businesses play in creating vibrancy. But the bid model formalizes the role that the private sector can play. The model allows money raised via mandatory levy on business rates to be invested into the local area and facilitates collaborative working to enable shared priorities to be realized on issues like public realm, security, traffic, and air quality. If we pause for a minute to look at the Cheapside Business Alliance as our trailblazing bid in the city, it's clear to see where the value's been added over the last 5 years since it was established. From delivering world-class events and supporting the city corporation's aspirations for the square mile to become a 24/7 destination, to backing local business growth through work placement schemes and networking events, the work of the CBA is varied and ambitious and aligns closely with the city corporation's long-term vision. At the beginning of this year, its efforts were rewarded with a resounding success at its renewal ballot, which served to reinforce the message that this sort of collaborative approach is growing in popularity. It's great that we've got Charlotte Fletcher here, the chair of the CBA, on this panel, and I know she'll be talking shortly about the work the CBA's been doing most recently to support retail and other businesses during the COVID pandemic. With more than 60 bids now operating in London alone, they are a core partner in the running of the capital. Looking specifically at this current crisis, bids have taken a lead role across London in the acute crisis phase, which started in March, with bids providing a vital role in communicating to businesses and offering support and guidance. Increasingly, as our attention now turns towards recovery, we're looking to bids to support the intensive work of the City Corporation and add value by engaging with the business community and bring concerns and ideas to the table. Undoubtedly, the crisis is not only having a short-term impact on the city, dramatic drop in footfall and extreme pressure on the ecosystem of businesses that keep the city engine moving day in, day out, from dry cleaners to sandwich shops. But looking further ahead, we know there are going to be some long-term changes, perhaps some that would have happened anyway, but have been accelerated by the pandemic, and others that we could not have envisaged just 6 months ago. City corporations acted swiftly throughout to be on the front foot, responding to changing needs on the ground, fast-tracking ambitious transportation and public realm schemes to facilitate more social distancing, and prioritizing pedestrianisation and cycle lanes. Crucially, we've been working closely with our businesses to understand the impacts on their commercial operations. Whilst we're still facing challenging times, we're confident that the city is still a viable, attractive global powerhouse. There is a role for businesses to have offices in the long term, and a huge need for workers to be able to collaborate and interact. The trick for us will be to once again innovate and evolve and be at the forefront of what the new world order will look like. Our work with the city bids and partnerships will enable us to do this in a robust and effective way. Together, we can ensure our actions are aligned with the needs of the businesses in our area, allowing our interventions to be amplified, with us all working towards shared goals and speaking with a united voice. Lastly, we will be able to collectively showcase the great assets of the City of London, promoting it to new investors, future talent, and international visitors, which will be crucial as we recover from this global pandemic. So in conclusion, we have some challenges before us, but together with the partnership model being embraced by the corporation, I think we are in the strongest position possible. The Chancellor talks of the need to learn to live with the virus without fear. And in the city, we're determined to play our part in figuring that conundrum out. Thank you, Giles.
Ravan, that's fantastic. I think it is crucial to live without fear. And I think the other thing that we also have to remember always about the City of London is just how long it has been here. It's defied a number of issues over the years. We were tremendously encouraged. We worked with the City of London Corporation at our firm, FDI Consulting, to poll hundreds of global investors in July to talk about the long-term, their long-term impression of the City of London, and it had barely flickered in terms of the appeal. London is still seen as preeminent ahead of New York, Hong Kong. Global investors see the long-term outlook. Now we just need to get over some, albeit very considerable, short-term issues. So thank you for talking about Charlotte Shravan. Over to you, Charlotte, the chair of the Cheapside Business Alliance. I walk up and down your street from Cannon Street every day. I'm willing it to get busier. What can we do about it?
Thanks, Giles. Well, yes, I'm also sitting here in the City of London. I can tell you it's definitely busier than it was about 5 or 6 weeks ago, but there's still an awful lot to be done. And obviously with changing rules and regulations, we have to always see that will have an impact variably. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about what impact the lockdown has had on retail in the city and how the bids have supported them and other businesses. So we all know that some sectors have been more adversely impacted due to the pandemic than others, and retail is definitely one of them. Arguably not to the same extent as hospitality and leisure, with many of those businesses still unable to operate. But nonetheless, the impact of lockdown and the prolonged restrictions and slow recovery have been profound for retail. I think if you take London, and specifically the City of London, it's perhaps even more at risk of the loss of the ecosystem of office workers and visitors than other cities. Heavily reliant on public transport to get our army of office workers into the centre each day, and increasingly benefiting from international visitors as the city embraced its 24/7 destination vision. The city is undoubtedly hurting at the moment, and you only need to walk around the square mile to see the impact. Many shops and venues still closed and still a relatively low footfall. That said, I am optimistic about the future, and I know from my work with the Cheapside Business Alliance and seeing the resilience and hard work of the retailers in this district that this crisis will be overcome. Huge investment has been made by retailers to make their shops as safe and as welcoming as possible. And of course, many are innovating and changing their business models to adapt to the changing times we find ourselves in. It won't be without its casualties. The high street and retail was already changing before COVID, and I think that the pandemic has fast-tracked some of the evolution that was already underway. It will be more important than ever for districts to get their offer right, not only the mix of retail and hospitality, but the whole visitor worker experience. What it feels like to visit an area, how unique, special is the offer? Is it memorable and shareable? Is it somewhere that leaves you wanting more? These questions lead us to the conclusion that collaborative working is the key to our success. Businesses working hand in hand with the public sector to develop a shared vision and then deliver it. Bids are the ideal model to deliver this collective action, providing a coordinated approach to partnership working, with the financial structure to enable them to bring about real change. As area custodians, bids not only focus on the major strategic issues, but also have a tangible positive impact on the operational aspects that really matter to people. Street ambassadors, enhanced street cleaning, security and wayfinding. These aren't necessarily the first things people notice when they come into an area, but they increasingly notice if they're missing. Day-to-day bids support the business in the area, and this has been vital during the pandemic, especially as the fragile recovery got underway. Promoting those businesses that were reopening their doors, providing clarity on the ever-changing government guidance, and ensuring our operational activities such as ambassadors and street cleaners were back out, providing a positive welcome to the area. These were the priority tasks for us at the Cheapside Business Alliance, and the feedback we received from our business community was overwhelmingly positive and continues to be so. From the smaller interventions to the bigger strategic visions and major projects, bids across London are making a huge difference. And I strongly believe that they will be the key to how well London recovers in the longer term. Thank you.
Charlotte, that's fantastic. And I think one thing we've all learned in the last few months is being organised, collaborating. As we've seen the health and care sectors under tremendous pressure, some people criticising them for being over-centralised, some people criticising them for being just chaotic in a general sense. I think partnership and collaboration is what we all need to get us through this, and encouraging to hear Cheapside Business Alliance is already hit the ground running to such an extent. Next to Vicky Fairhall, we're going to hear now from the development world. Vicky is from Brookfield, and of course, amidst all this, we have to bear in mind the thoughts and issues facing real estate owners. The market has gone very, very quiet, although it does seem as if there's still interest, certainly amongst the investment community, in real estate in the city. Vicky, what's been happening at the coalface? What's the situation as far as the resilience of the commercial sector, and how have you formulated in your mind ways to work with bids to get us through this?
Oh, thanks, Giles. I'm also in the city this morning, and actually it's pretty busy around Moorgate, not too bad. And I think in terms of what we're seeing in terms of footfall numbers into our buildings, we were up to about 18% in in August, and then it started falling back down again, and we're around about 16%. So it seems to have sort of plateaued at that level. So I think in terms of resilience of the business sector, I mean, incredibly resilient. I mean, from the moment that obviously lockdown happened and how quickly the business models changed to the working from home. And then as we got through and started lifting lockdown, you see how businesses within, I mean, particularly within our assets, that how they then sort of adjusted again, made their workplaces safe to welcome people back. Clearly the challenge has been around the clarity from the government and the guidance and obviously the change in the directive in the last week or so, where they're encouraging people to work from home again. I mean, that is causing all sorts of problems for businesses to really encourage people back to the workplace and make them feel safe. And although I think businesses recognize how important it is to get people back into the workplace for, I mean, so many reasons, whether it's for collaboration, creativity, training, and well-being of their people, and also ultimately productivity. It's just the challenges that they're facing to get this guidance right and to make people feel safe coming back to the workplace. I think that's really where I think that the bids come into play as to how we can support businesses in this short term, in this challenging lobbying the government to make sure that they realise the uniqueness of the City of London and how we need to support the businesses, and clarity in that messaging and guidance is key to start getting people back into the workplace. And I think really then it's the sort of more of the longer term role that the bids can play to really look to the future. You know, of course there's going to be change, there's going to be seismic change post this pandemic, and it's how the bids can work collaboratively as one voice to really support the businesses and get that messages out there. So you know, business have been through these challenges before, and they'll endure it and they'll get through it and they will recover. But it's key that we've got this structure around the bids, working with the City of London to really support the business and bring their work people, the employees back safely.
Fantastic. So yeah, a couple of observations there, Victoria. I thought Catherine McGuinness from the City of London was tremendously impressive on the Today programme on Radio 4 week before last, with the actual messaging of come back to work if you know it's safe to come back to work. And so much work has gone into making buildings COVID compliant that those people are safe coming back in large part. My eye was also drawn to some work that Imperial College have done for Transport for London just last week, where they've basically gone through the underground and taken tests and swabs, you name it, from anything that people might touch. And there is no coronavirus to be caught on the underground as long as people wear masks. You can't actually catch it from touching anything, which I think was a really clever piece of messaging, because I think certainly 4 or 5 months ago there was a feeling that perhaps if you touch the escalator or a rail on the tube, that would be a problem. I think if you wear a mask, it's you know, you are in a good place going back onto the tube, and that's a really crucial point. Next on to Alistair Subarow. Alistair, you are as close as anyone to what occupiers, the people who are in buildings or leasing buildings from landlords, are thinking. Are they taking a rain check? What their long-term thinking, and how can bids galvanise everything we're talking about at the moment?
Thank you, Giles, and good morning, everybody. we are in unprecedented times, but we have to remember that this is very early days in terms of the presence of the virus and the impact of the virus. The office is not dead. London is still open for business. There are difficult mixed messages coming out of the government in terms of come back to work or work at home, which Vicky referred to. And we also have to remember the impact of cost on making buildings COVID compliant, and that sweeping statement of work from home has used up quite a significant amount of money that's basically been poured into buildings to make them clean and safe to use. What I'm seeing on the ground in terms of tenant demand is broken down into a number of different areas. We believe that there is business plan first and property second. So business plans are busy being rewritten at the moment to cater for what's going on here, but ultimately there is significant demand for offices in the square mile in central London, millions of square feet. What you do have to do is to break that down into actually how real is that demand? Is it aspirational? Because from a market point of view, landlords don't want voids now, so they're working even harder given vacancy rates are rising in London. They're working much harder to keep tenants. We went into this pandemic on the basis of low vacancy rates, significant rental growth, and very limited new and newly refurbished space being around for occupiers effectively to adhere to their business plan, which was to move to new functional space. And I believe that some of those business plans still exist. The tenants that I've been talking to still want to achieve a relocation. The big question is how much? How much space do I need now? Because what the pandemic has done is it's sped up the actual use of agile working, but it hasn't replaced coming to the office. There are still people who need to be there. So when we talk about reduced demand, it's probably a reduced size demand. It's an appropriately sized demand, but actually there are still deals being done. There are either corporate deals that were in the offering that still need to be done. We have to remember that from a business plan point of view, there are a number of people looking to move from multiple floors onto single floors. That's part of their business plan. They're looking from old space to new space. There's still a number of people in central London occupation sitting in quite tired space. And therefore, there is going to be a flight to quality. There is going to be a flight to location, how easy it is for me to get my staff in and out of central London. And there is going to be a flight to flexibility, because what we do know is that however much space I take today isn't necessarily going to be how much I need tomorrow, because we are still very early in the days of establishing what real requirements are. The workplace consultants are working incredibly hard, trying to work through the functionality of an office, coupled with maybe the 1, 2, possibly 3 days working from home. We've got to remember succession planning in how people come to an office and they learn. We've got to remember collaboration that's been talked about a lot in terms of how we talk as teams. So there is no one size fits all. And I honestly believe that there are significant number of inquiries out there that will keep what we call the churn going. There is a requirement for landlords to start to increase Cat A plus space being released, because the banks clearly are going to have an eye on lending money, which is the traditional route for fitting out premises offset against rent-free periods. But actually some of the banks don't particularly want to lend that money now. So landlords with good balance sheets are going to start to offer Cat A plus finished space. And that equally is going to have an impact on the serviced office sector, because the serviced office sector, if you look at some of the offerings from the main providers, are still trying to work on a 1 per 5 square meters, 50 square feet basis, and that simply doesn't work if you look at their numbers. But we have a churn. We have statistics that show we're significantly down as take-up, that vacancy rates are going to grow, so the market will reach its level. But provided we have good quality space in good locations, if you happen to be in 50,000 square feet and you now need 25,000 feet, you still need 25. If you're in 10 and need 5, you still need 5. It's how we mature the marketplace to allow for that demand to fit into the business plans of what is predominantly an SME market operational at the moment. Turning to the bids and the role, as you know, I've been involved in bids for about 25 years when they were LIPs. They were local improvement partnership schemes before they became business improvement districts. They are a private and public initiative to basically get area stewardship, and bids have an amazing role to play. We started with 5 of them in London, sorry. We've now got over 50 in London and over 300 around the country. They help enormously in terms of public consultation. They help the local authorities bring schemes forward for public realm improvements, transport strategies. They help with the interface with Transport for London. We get wider pavements, we get cycle lanes. But on top of that, we have the energy and enthusiasm between the bid companies with their stakeholders that are providing destination marketing. They're providing the invigorative support for local businesses, retailers, restaurants, bars, clubs, all sorts of retail trade, as well as promoting. They're the modern day chamber of commerce that is really invigorating local stewardship. And it is a battle of the bids, because actually all the bids are fighting for the occupiers to come into their area, which is really healthy. And one of the things that I've enjoyed, having worked with the North Bank bid and the Hatton Garden bid and the Midtown bid, is the embracing of the City Corporation to the future of bids, and our very own Fleet Street Quarter partnership, which we are just launching. We have the newspaper industry buildings, which were reoccupied by Goldman Sachs and various professional consultants. And we have a 9 million square foot footprint in that Fleet Street, Ludgate Hill corridor, that we're going to go up against all of the other bids to prove that we're the best location in the centre of London with Crossrail and City Thameslink. And the bid has got a massive role to play in area regeneration. So really exciting times for London. And when we're down about London, we've got to remember it's been knocked a number of times over the last 3 or 4 decades, and it is resilient and it does fight back. And if we all come together, we will get London back to where it was pre-lockdown.
That's fantastic, stirring stuff. I think it is interesting, isn't it? When you think about London, New York City is exactly as quiet as London at the moment. This isn't a London-only issue. This is an issue that big cities all around the world have to put their minds to solving. And I think the more we hear about it, thank goodness for the bids that do exist and are being formed, because it gives us this great platform to collaborate in terms of getting things moving again. We've had quite a few questions from the audience, and we'll go to those in a minute. But next up, and our final speaker is Ian Mulcahy, who's from Gensler. Ian's also chair of the Aldgate bid. Ian, let's hear more about how the city's infrastructure and general framework and public realm might change going forward, and also your impressions on what you may have heard so far.
No, I think there's been a fascinating conversation about how you encourage people back to the office, and I say office because I think there's a kind of a view out there that perhaps people aren't working. I think people are working from home and are very, very busy from home. And I think the question that a lot of organizations are asking is it as good for my business if I move people from their home environment back to their office environment? And I think a lot of businesses are continually trying to weigh up that debate. And I think one of the things we're seeing is I think there are certain things actually people are finding they can do very, very efficiently from home, and will probably carry on doing efficiently from home in the future. But there's a lot of other things that people still need to do, and they're struggling to do perhaps at home. And I think one of the things we're now focused on, both as a business ourselves, but also the Aldgate Connect bid, which is what are the things that we really need from the office? So what are the things that will help our businesses move forward? And I think it's this thing about we need a place to meet. We need a place to share things. We need a place to socialize. We need a place that we can teach and educate our staff and those next generation workers coming up. And I think those are all things that we're struggling to do actually in that sort of lockdown world in our office. And hence, I think a lot of people have been a little bit more reticent about coming back than many of us thought. But I think all of those are clues as to what the city needs to provide for people in the future. I think, and I think we've just talked earlier about this more agile way of working. I don't think it is an analog debate about I work from home or I work from the office. Actually, I think people are finding they can work from lots and lots of different locations, but they need an environment to do these very particular things. And the city provides that environment. That's its purpose. Its purpose isn't so you can go into work and check your emails. The purpose is so you can meet and socialize and share and network with people. And I think there's going to be a lot of focus now on making sure the city's doing that for us in the right way. So I think the design of public realm, access to public realm is going to be very, very important. I think the quality of environment, so I can move from one place to the other without feeling like I'm in a crowd or feeling like it's congested, I think is going to be very important. And I think bids have a role to play. They're listening to the needs of business, and they're able to work with and collaborate with local authorities and other organizations who are key stakeholders in all of this. But my sense is I am optimistic. I do think London has a massive role to play, but I think business is proving incredibly resilient. They've adapted the way they've been working for, in many cases, generations overnight to a new way of working. And I think that's also given a clue as to the future of how we might work. And the future role of the city centre and the future role of all the offices that many of us now occupy. And I'm super excited because I think it changes the nature of that, but perhaps changes it in a positive way, not a negative way. But I think the big thing, I think all of us are looking to, whether we're going to come back in droves in October or November, probably doesn't really matter. But I do think the way we come back, the way we utilize our city is going to be different. And I think people are going to be looking for more balance in their lives generally, but also balance between actually where I live in relationship to where I do my work, and my work in a much broader, more general way. And I think this idea that actually our bid, Aldgate bid, straddles both the city and part of Tower Hamlets. And actually what's interesting about that area, it has a very big residential population in addition to a very big office population. And I think we're already hearing from certain businesses that people who live in those locations are actually much more enthusiastic about going back to the office to do their work because it's close by. And I think there's a real clue in there trying to get a better balance of living and working in not just in central London, but I think in cities and communities across the country.
Ian, that's fantastic. So just a couple of questions from me before we go to the audience's ones. I mean, I think what's really one of the things that you said that was interesting was people not wanting to go into the office just to check their emails. One thing personally I've noticed is I get so many more emails from colleagues now. I mean, I'd rather just be talking to them than grinding through the emails. It's amazing when you go through them at the end of the day. There's sort of, yes, got it, thank you, wow, brilliant, and that's not what working life is all about, is looking at
I
email.
totally agree, and I love Esther Ranson's current campaign about, a phone call's worth a kind of 1,000 emails or 1,000 text messages, and I'd go further. In one 5-minute conversation, you can do 100 emails. Do you know what I mean? In terms of its communication value, and I actually think that's why sessions like this, where again, would we have done this to the degree we are doing now in video conferencing, where we're talking together, not reading pamphlets or documents, is so interesting, because I agree with you. Human interaction is the premium experience, and that is going to be the thing that's going to draw everyone back to the city centre, the human physical experience of interaction, whether that be going to the theatre or going to a gallery or attending a meeting in a building, or socializing together. And that's where we have to focus our attention, as to how to make, and I love the term flight to quality, because that is going to be the trend. People are going to have the choice to move to better buildings in better environments, and offering a better quality of place to do their business.
Okay, so as I said, I've got a couple of questions. Shravan, first, thank you very much for your presentation there. How for people who haven't perhaps been into London for a few months, how do you think they'll feel coming back into the city? What might they see? What might they see that is different, and what other measures will you be putting into place to encourage those people to come back to the city?
Thanks, Giles. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I've got to say, what an optimistic bunch we all are. It's great to see so much faith in bids and in the city. I think the most obvious visible changes that people will see as they emerge out of transport hubs, or as they enter the square mile, is going to be the road layouts have changed completely. The city's been renowned for centuries for having small alleyways and limited access through these very small channels, these rat runs. That has changed significantly, and we've put in place social distancing measures. Pavements are wider. We've put in cycling lanes to encourage people to use active transport where they can. And you will see a number of sort of one-way road systems in place for motor vehicles. And so the idea is that as people do start to get confidence to come back, using active transport where they can, they should be coming into a safe and secure environment where they can socially distance and keep to the government guidelines. The other aspect, of course, is the work we're trying to do with TfL and the government to encourage a message around the safety that the train network has. And as you mentioned, the idea that surfaces don't seem to be as relevant to transmission as perhaps the air around us. It's messages like that we need to get clear and concise and unified to people to say, actually the train network is safe to use, it is clean, and you're only going to get a critical mass of people back once you've got them using that mass transport system. Okay,
and then I've got one for the two property experts, Vicky and Alistair. Vicky, I think it's really interesting. Ian just used the term flight to quality. What does this mean for the difference between grade A, grade B, grade C type offices? Because as Alistair said, there may be a smaller amount of demand, but what you do create had better be good, if you like. I mean, how do you think we'll see the office of the future looking, and what the demand might be for?
Yeah, I think there will be the growing gap between grade A and B and C space, just because, as you say, there's flight to quality. If you're going to have space, if you're going to have office space, it's got to be the best space, because that's going to be really key to attract labour, etc., to your company. So I think it's definitely going to be looking to, okay, being more efficient with space, but then also making sure it is the best space that they can acquire. And so we're really looking at future-proofing our space. So really looking at not just the pandemic itself and the impact on the design of offices that the pandemic will have, but also looking at other future disruptors to business and how office design will evolve in order to accommodate that and make it more resilient. So I can, I echo the flight to quality piece, but I think it's up to us as developers and landlords to really look at how we can future-proof the design of offices to make sure that they are resilient and they are catering for what our clients, occupiers want in the future.
I think I've had enough of disruption for 1 year, but what might be the next ones that you're thinking about?
Well, I mean, I think actually an interesting presentation from Foster's and Partners, and they're working for sort of global companies looking at, civil unrest, future pandemics, how other pandemics might come. I mean, it's not just, I mean, the last few months has not just been a pandemic that's hit the world. There's plenty of other things that have been unrest that has been occurring, and it's really how the workplace is going to future-proof and accommodate future disruptors, not just the pandemic.
Okay, Alistair, as senior partner of Fairbrother, as you say, you're at the heart of the London market. Also, as vice chair for the Fleet Street Quarter, this change in what property might be developed, because I'm surrounded by some brilliant buildings. They're just not going to be empty, but maybe there's some smaller ones, some older ones that may have to have a different future.
I think they do have they have to be analysed on the basis that they might not be fit for purpose for the office market of the future. We're all doing quite a bit of research at the moment as to what does the occupier want. And it's not just all about the big occupier, it's the smaller occupiers as well. I think if you start from the premise where your lease asset is an asset to the business, it's actually performing, it's doing something for the business. It's either staff retention, client additions, in attracting new talent. One's got to then look at that asset as an asset as opposed to a liability. I know the accountants on this webinar would say actually a lease is a liability to the business, but we really take it back to the basics and saying, right, so my staff coming in, my colleagues coming into work, what is it that they want when they get there? It's not just dull, boring office space. It's got to be engaging. The amenities need to provide a home from home type hoteling. And I think what's evolving at the moment is this greater degree of thought behind, I'm a landlord and I've got a customer, not a tenant, that's paying me rent. So how do I keep that rental flow? What can I do to help their business? And we're starting to see the evolving of concierge services, proper ones. We've got WhatsApp groups between tenants in the building. There's running clubs, there's movie nights, there's beer nights when we're allowed. There's all sorts of things going on, which is making the office a destination for not just work, but for enjoyment as well. And yes, people will work from home, but I think you're going to start to see some buildings that don't provide the basis. And depending upon which local authority you're based in, there will be a greater or lesser degree of planning brief and the local development framework allowing for change of uses for those parts of the building. There has been a resistance within central London to residential, conversions to residential. There's going to be an enormous amount of pressure in a desire to create a more cosmopolitan environment of live, work, play type recipe. Is that where is the residential component going to come from? We've got lots more educational establishments, student accommodation, not those 18-year-olds out of school, but some mature students. We've got LSE, we've got King's, we've got UCL. You've probably got Harvard and Stanford and a number of the American universities wanting to come to London as well. and the innovations, that Cambridge innovations, where people are coming and creating things from an entrepreneurial point of view. So I think flexibility of space, flexibility of lease arrangements, and creating nice collaborative spaces, warming, engaging spaces will be a really good part of the ingredients of a vibrant city going forward.
Okay, thanks, Alice. So we're going to go to some of the questions now from the audience. An interesting one from Michaela Wilson, who is a well-known property expert. Hello, Michaela. Michaela says, we've heard a lot about the impact of the pandemic on the hospitality industry, but do we know what the impact has been on financial services and banking, etc.? Has productivity dropped dramatically? If it has, will this be the economic driver to get people back into the city? Ian, as a workplace expert, I'm going to put this one to you, because I'm always interested when people say they're much more productive from home. I don't know how they know they're more productive, because, as I say, a lot of it just involves sending lots and lots of emails. Is there something that can be done, or that the city or the bids can do, to show how productive the workplace or the traditional workplace is? What can be done to prove it's this great fusion that I think we all know it is?
I think a lot of these trends we could see developing very well before COVID. I think there was already a big push for a greater degree of agility in the workplace, and people were voting with their feet. You already saw it in the ridership numbers that TfL were getting on the tube, that people were staying away from peak hour travel. They were actually starting to work from home 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and you could see that process already beginning, and technology really enabling that to happen in a way that perhaps wasn't really possible a few years ago. I think the question about whether people are more productive in that environment or not just depends on so many different factors. And again, we're doing a lot of survey work of organizations to try and understand that. And I think that has to do with your home environment as much as your work environment. Are you able to work from home in the way that you are able to work from the office? And some people are finding it much easier, and some people actually, particularly younger people and people with young families, are finding it much more difficult in some respects. So I think there is no simple analog that one is better than the other. But I think what people are craving is flexibility. They're actually saying, some days it works for me at home, some days it works for me in the office. Some years it may work for me in the office, some years it may work for me at home. And I think it's very different in different fields. What we do see is that a lot of businesses, particularly technology businesses, who have actually been expanding, hiring, and their business growing throughout the last few months, not necessarily contracting. And again, that must mean that they're able to run their business productively, and they must see a bigger and bigger demand for their services. And I think I look at our own business. We have 6,000 people globally working from home, and actually it's proving pretty good. I don't think it's really undermining our productivity in any meaningful way, but we're not meeting with each other, we're not socializing with each other, and we're not inviting people into our office to engage with us. So I think there's a long-term implication of what we're going through. And I think a long-term aspiration is to try and have a much more graduated, much more nuanced approach to the way we work. And I think many businesses are now exploring that actively. Very few businesses we're talking to are talking about moving 100% of their staff back to the office 100% of the time. Very, very few.
Okay. All right. We've got one from Duncan Ray now, who says, it's interesting to hear bids being positioned in this discussion in terms of inward investment and area regeneration. The departure from bids' origins as consumer and destination marketing. How would a bid approach this differently to a local authority? Obviously, Charlotte, you're working alongside the Corporation of London, but do you think, are we seeing, or will this create a change in the way bids operate, do you think?
I think bids have evolved greatly. Alistair was talking about when his first involvement with them was, and how many we have now. And I think there were obviously specific requirements and needs of why they came about and started, but I definitely think that they evolve. And I think it's crucial, we talk about collaboration, but, particularly with Cheapside, that partnership with the City of London Corporation, and it has to be a partnership with the various local authorities. And it's like, right, what are the areas that the local businesses need that can't be, immediately covered by a local authority? And then it's the businesses, combining, communicating, collaborating, obviously, financing as well. And to then deliver exactly what they want. And I think actually the retail within the City of London working, obviously, they're the supply and demand, they're fed by the office workers and the visitors. So it's got to be an understanding of what's needed, what's wanted, and then delivering on that. Things like, the additional public realm, the widening of the pavements, the green spaces, quite few and far between in the city, but actually there's quite a lot of them. And the City of London Corporation, look after those and support those. But then the Cheapside Business Alliance actually promote them. Here's where they are. We're going to, let people know we're going to do a walking guided audio tour of the best green spaces in London. We're going to put some art installations, in certain little squares and pockets of green space. And it's those kind of things that really just add to the space and make it thrive, and for people to realize what a great place to be it is. So I think that's where they may have started out being for one specific reason, but I think now the use and the benefit of the bids is quite wide ranging.
Okay, we've got just one more question before we go to some concluding remarks. It's been as I say, plenty coming in. One for you, Shravan. This is from an anonymous attendee who says, are local planning authorities really prepared to accept flexibility in their current policies? It would appear that different sections in the planning departments have conflicting views, e.g. changing the use of listed buildings versus maintaining surplus office spaces. What can the panel do to influence these views? I mean, Shravan, it's a tricky question, but I suppose what the anonymous questioner was saying, can local authorities be flexible enough in a time like this when you've also got other bigger forces and restrictions to think about?
Thanks, Giles. And it is a challenge. Look, it's not an easy one. In the City of London, particularly, I think we've got a high concentration of heritage buildings. That's what makes the city, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You've got to be able to maintain that heritage, that culture, those aspects of the city that make it what it is and has done over the centuries, and yet keep an eye on the future. So it is a very, very difficult balancing act. Of course, you're going to get conflicting views between officers, between members, between all stakeholders. Everyone's going to have an opinion on this, and so they should. And they should be able to air those and voice those. And I'll answer this in the context of another question that I saw popping up as well around, should we allow car use in to encourage people into the square mile? And I think one of the impacts that we are at risk of throwing away here is things like climate strategy, things where we have taken a broader, longer term view and said we've got to address these matters as a matter of urgency, like climate. We run the risk of saying, well, actually, because of the pandemic, let's just scrap all of that and get on with it and knock it all down. We've got to be careful that we don't lose sight of longer term aims. And we don't want to lose the values that we have simply because of a short term strategy. So I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Well, I'm going to ask one last question, which is, what do you think will be the key factor in getting people back to the city? I'm going to ask everyone around the panel. Going to go in reversed order from which they spoke. So, Ian from Gensler and chair of the audit bid.
I think it's people I think people feeling comfortable, people feeling safe to travel, safe when they get there, and also people feeling like there's a purpose, that they're not going in because they have to go in or because people have told them to go in. They're going in and they're volunteering to go in because they're thinking, oh, this is so good. I can actually meet people again. I can connect with people again, and I can do things again. And I just think, I think it will come. I think, in my own view, it will come probably in the spring, as people starting to feel better about things and the sun's coming out again. But I think people will collectively feel a sense of comfort together. And I just think I think we just all got to be patient. We've all got to keep working at making the offices feel safer, look safer, and be safer, but also the public transport systems, and then the public realm, and the way we can move around streets in a safe manner. And I think you'll just generally feel a gradual relaxation and a sense of comfort in everybody's minds.
Okay, Alistair, what do you think is the key factor?
I think I agree with a lot of what Ian has said. I think we're a data-driven society, so we'll need to see some reduction in cases, numbers, and so forth, and that will follow routes of periods of lockdown. We've all been talking about the availability of a vaccine coming in. The vaccine, when it's here, will create some degree of safe feeling. Going back to Ian's point about coming back into the city, I've been in the city many times, continue to do so each week, and therefore actually I feel personally that the underground has never been cleaner. 30 years as a commuter, it's actually really nice to be on the underground. The trains are clean as well. So I think data, we're a bit of a lemming society, so we'll see more people coming back. The bids need to encourage more opening of some of the retail offerings, because you know our society is about getting out there and having a cup of coffee and a sandwich and socialising. We're a very good London society. So it'll be a blend of things, but it has to start with, I feel safe to travel in, I feel safe being there. And I suspect it will be data driven as a result of that. But in the meantime, you know, we're saying to people, come in, you know, if you feel safe to do so. You have to be very careful these days in terms of the legal and the HR implications of making people come back to work. But you should want to go back to work. One of the fears I have across London is that the not being in work turns from being encouraged by the government to work from home to being habitual. And once it moves to a habitual stage, then we have to find the encouragement, the dig deep for people to come back in and break that habit of being at home.
Okay. Vicky, what's your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with what's already been said. It's, you know, safety is critical, building people's confidence back, and particularly in the public transport. It's a sort of slightly chicken and egg situation. We talk about the sort of the future of offices, what people want from offices, being able to meet and collaborate and socialise. But actually, when people get in and they realise that people aren't here, then they're going to go, well, what's the point of being in the office? Yeah. So, yeah, critical that we get that critical mass of people back into the city, so people can really see the benefit of coming to the office and being in the city.
Yeah, I'm in a team of 30, and then one day last week there was 9 of us, and it was, I can't tell you how good it was just to have that sort of efficiency of shouting across the office to someone. Charlotte, over to you. What's the big question? What will be the key factor in getting people back to the city?
Yeah, again, agree with the other panelists. In terms of, and I suppose from a retail and sort of, you know, leisure, food and beverage outlook, safety as well. So I know that CBA have been working and piloting a kind of a COVID accreditation scheme, so that both businesses, local smaller businesses in particular, can feel that they have ticked all the boxes. They've done everything within their power. You know, the Environmental Health Agency has sort of signed off to say that they are doing everything they can to provide a safe environment for their customers. And I think those kind of things will, you know, sticker in the window, COVID accredited, whatever that sort of comes to be after the pilot. I think that will help greatly. And I also think, as lots of people have spoken about in terms of quality, I always talk about in retail the changes that have been happening that have just been sped up over the last 6 months, but actually been happening over the last sort of 10 years. You've got to look at convenience and experience. Ideally, you have both, but you better have one or the other. Customers, office workers, everyone is, has far higher expectations of what they want, and they have data, they have lots and lots of options. So you really have to be able to give somebody that experience, whether it's just them by name and you know what sandwich they have every day, to something just so quick and easy that it's seamless. So I think experience and convenience are going to be key for getting the retail back in the city.
Okay, and with the last word before I hand back to Bonnie, Shravan, you kicked us off. What do you think will be the key factor in getting people back into the city?
Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat what everyone said. I absolutely agree with them. The one thing I will say, I think the critical piece here is communication, and the only way you're going to get confidence and trust in people is to have strong, unified communication, and that's got to come from the top. Having almost mapping out the journey for employees from the moment they leave home to the moment they get to work, the moment they sit down at their desk, in mapping that out for people, making it really clear what that safe route to work is really critical. And having sort of blanket policies across the entire country just seems a very, very blunt tool. And we kind of need to get the private sector, the public sector, public health, all working together to get that communication bang on.
Okay. Bonnie, back to you. I think you've got some more Real Estate Live messages you want to pick up on, but I've certainly found that encouraging, very encouraging panel. I hope we can all meet up again face to face soon, whether it's in the next few months or next spring, but I've found that really interesting. So Bonnie, back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Giles, and thanks to our panel and to the City of London and the Bids and Business Partnerships for bringing this session together. Really interesting discussion, fascinating to see how it's moved on from our first event in June, and yeah, definitely a very big fan of the optimism that was shared, so thank you all for joining us. Next up this afternoon, as part of the Real Estate Live programme, we have a panel on Waltham Forest, which is happening immediately now, and one on Croydon. But if you're interested in hearing more on the City of London, they're hosting 2 further sessions with us later this week. All details of those are on the Real Estate Live website, and we hope to see you at one, if not all of those events in the next few days. So yeah, thank you again to our panel and our sponsors, and Giles for chairing. It was a really great discussion. Thank you.